الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين. أما بعد, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala tells us in His glorious book in Surat Al-Kahf, chapter 18, in verse 32. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واضرب لهم مثلا رجلين جعلنا لأحدهما جنتين من أعناب وحففناهما بنخل وجعلنا بينهما زرعا. And present to them an example of two men. We granted to one of them 2 gardens of grapevines, and we bordered them with palm trees and placed between them fields of crop. Now this story came after the story of the people of the cave, and that's the second story that signifies the fitna of wealth. So the story goes that these 2 men, one of them Allah granted great fortune. I mean, the 2 gardens are an example of immense wealth. There's a river gushing through them, crops were abundant, and life was good. In verse 34, وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَرٌ فَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. And he had fruit, so he said to his companion while he was conversing with him, I'm greater than you in wealth and mightier in number of men. Now, وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَرٌ is an indication that he had other investments. So not only these gardens brought him, a great income, he had other investments. It just signifies great wealth. So he was boasting to his friend of lesser means of his great fortune. وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتَهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ قَالَ مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً وَلَئِن رُدِدتُّ إِلَى رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا in verses 35 and 36. And he entered his garden while he was unjust to himself. He said, I don't think that this will perish ever, and I do not think the hour will occur. And even if I should be brought back to my Lord, I will surely find better than this as a return. So the one who acts this way when he's given a lot of fortune, he commits shirk and boasting, typically. And they wrong themselves and invite Allah's punishment. So in the story goes that his friend reminded him of his humble beginnings, that you were nothing. You were, a sperm, then it became an egg, then became a man. And then he reminded him, but he wouldn't listen. So in verse 42, Allah says, وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ فَأَصْبَحَ يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى مَا أَنْفَقَ فِيهَا وَهِيَ خَاوِيَةٌ عَلَى عُرُوشِهَا وَيَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أُشْرِكْ بِرَبِّي أَحَدًا. And his fruit were encompassed by ruin. It was destroyed. Everything was destroyed. So he began to turn his hands about in dismay. All gone. Over what he had spent on it while it had collapsed upon its trellises, and said, oh, I wish I had not associated with my Lord anyone. So the owner of the gardens paid for his shirk, and the verse is describing his behavior as shirk, as association with Allah. He paid for his shirk when Allah says, وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ, it was all destroyed. Now, the stories in the Quran are not stories in themselves. It's not a historical representation of something that happened and will never happen again. They're illustrative stories because the story happens over and over and over again until the end of time. So Allah is teaching us with this example. Now these 2 men may be real or maybe an example, but nonetheless, the important part is the moral of the story. Like we were saying in the story of the people of the cave. Their number is not the important thing. It's the fact that their faith was jeopardized and they preferred to go hide in a cave than to live in luxury. So that's the moral of that story. So let's see if we can get some points from this story that, it's the story about people who excel in this life. They have businesses, they are skilled in their field of work, They may be geniuses, they may be, they may have great fortune, real estates, businesses, all kinds of income. They're the upper class per human classification. So it's their story. When these people get to that point, what are the slippery slopes that one can get into when he has a lot of means? When you're, sometimes when you're poor, there's not a lot of places where you can get in trouble. When you have a lot of means, that's when trouble begins, because now you have the means to get into it. So this story repeats over and over. It is the slippery slope of wealth and means. So the first point is when life opens up its doors and you start making money, hand over fist, as the expression goes, a lot of people get into the slippery slope of shirk. They attribute their success to their effort. My degrees, I was smart, I was this, I was that. They forget that Allah Ta'ala is the one who made it happen, and He can take it away. So they start patting themselves on the back. I made a great business deal. Or I'm glad I got my PhD, now I can do this and that. That's the slippery slope when you amass this fortune and you attribute it to your own effort. Now you're committing shirk. And shirk is not to worship somebody other than Allah. No, the person may still worship Allah, but now you're associating your means, your effort with Allah. Your means are just, you have to do it, but everything comes from Allah. If Allah wants to grant to you, you will have it. And if He gave it to you, you have to be humble and thankful. So, this is called hidden shirk, shirk al-khafi. You're not aware of it. You do it sometimes without even thinking, but you have to, Allah is telling us this story so you are aware. When you get to the point where you have, wealth, you have means, you have prestige, you have a position, whatever you have, don't delude yourself thinking that you are the one who earned it. It was all because of Allah Ta'ala. He gave it to you. He granted it to you, and He can remove it if you are ungrateful. So that's the first point. The second point is, just because life is good today doesn't mean it'll be like that tomorrow. Continuation of good fortune is not guaranteed. And sometimes people get into that, delude themselves. Just because they are wealthy today, they think things will gonna continue till they die and continue to the hereafter. Just because you have wealth is not an indication that Allah is happy with you. He gives you wealth, and He gives everyone else wealth as a test. It could be a reward, but it's not necessary. It's not a reliable gauge to think, is Allah happy with me or not? Just because you have wealth is not a reliable indicator. And people think that, I am rich, so Allah is happy with me, and when I die, I'm going to have, even more in heaven. How do you know? It's not, don't delude yourself. You have something in this life, be thankful and hope that Allah Ta'ala will reward you in the hereafter. But وَإِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ لَيْسَ لِوَقَعَتِهَا كَاذِبَةٌ خَافِضَةٌ رَافِعَةٌ. When the day of judgment comes, some people who were the top in this life are at the bottom, and vice versa. So don't delude yourself that just because you have good things now, first, they'll continue, or that Allah is happy with you. He may or may not, but it's not a reliable indicator. So that's the second point. Because that's what the owner of the two gardens was telling his friend. I don't think that, I think it's going to continue forever. How do you know? And the third point I want to bring today is another slippery slope, is the desire to boast. To show off, look what I have. So, and social media has put this on steroid. Boasting about your salary, Boasting about, or you can be conversing with somebody or taking a picture, putting it on Facebook. Look at the $3,000 steak I'm eating. How do you know who's looking at it? Could be hungry, can't even afford to eat a piece of bread. And now you're sitting there boasting that you are eating a $2,000 steak. You're effectively telling that person, أنا أكثر منك مالا وأعز نفرا. I'm better than you. You may not mean it that way, but that's how it's received. Expensive meals, extravagant homes, extravagant cars. Maybe I have a sports car. Maybe I have, I took a vacation, it cost $50,000. I had a wedding for my daughter, it was $3 million. You're basically telling others, I am better than you. That's the slippery slope that the story is warning us against. When you admire what you have, Allah tells you in this verse, praise Allah and show gratitude. And don't rub it in anybody's face. You are enjoying it. What do you care if people know or not? It's not going to increase your enjoyment. Privacy is a great thing. And now there is no more privacy. People go on social media and they can see minute by minute what you're doing all day. That can't be. That is not appropriate. Allah says, وَلَوْلَا إِذْ دَخَلْتَ جَنَّتَكَ قُلْتَ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. You enter your home, you see, a beautiful wife, great children, nice, big, spacious house, expensive furniture. Don't pat yourself on the shoulder and say, oh, I'm great, I'm glad I did this business deal and that business deal. No, thank Allah that He recognized that everything that you have came from Allah. That's what you're saying, that, Ya Allah, thank you. Ma sha'Allah la quwwata illa billah. I have no power on my own. Everything came from Allah. If Allah did not give it to me, there is no way I could have had it. That's how a believer thinks. And that's what makes you humble. Because if you know that Allah gave it to you, He can surely take it away if you're ungrateful. And what more ungratefulness than not to recognize that Allah is the one that gave it to you? Allah gave it to you, go thank somebody else? Or you thank yourself? What kind of a gratitude is this? You're asking for it. People who behave like that are asking for Allah to destroy whatever they have. So Allah is telling us these things so we can be mindful. If you have something great, thank Allah. Employ it in His service. Don't go showing off to people. Because what happens is, when you show it to people of lesser means, you may not mean anything to it, but how it's received is I am better than you. I have more money, I have more children, I have more this, more that. So two things could happen. First of all, they're not going to be happy for you. Very few people will be happy for you when you tell them that and they're in a situation of need. They're either going to build resentment against you, or even worse, against Allah. Ya Allah, you gave him and you deprived me. That's how some people could feel. You're instigating this feeling in them. Or they may pray that Allah destroy whatever you have. They may not say it to you, but that's what they're thinking in themselves. Oh, you're rubbing it in my face. I wish Allah will destroy it. You don't want that. If you have means, you don't need to share with everyone. Just thank Allah and employ it, help others. Use it to help others. Recognize that it all came from Allah. And it doesn't fit a believer to boast. You may not look at it as boasting, but the second you post your expensive, whatever you're doing on social media, you are boasting. Whether you recognize it or not, that's exactly what you're doing. If you want to compete with others, Allah says, وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. Compete in matters of the hereafter. Compete for Jannah. Compete in Allah's pleasure. Compete in good manners, in piety, in knowledge, in closeness to Allah. Those things you can not brag, but display and encourage others to adopt. أقول قولي هذا، أستغفر الله لكم فاستغفروه إنه الغفور الرحيم.